from an undisclosed location in the Great Western Desert in the land of the free and autonomous Native American people, the 2024 presidential campaign in exile to return all US land back to their right owners. This is the Ben Zion Podcast.
Techno-communism. Welcome back to the Techno-communism Podcast. I'm doing a show that's specifically a response to an article about the complexities of machine learning and large language models and chatbots that utilize these, relating it to a famous Chinese room experiment by John Searle. Before I get into that, yes, this article was sent to me by one of my oldest friends from high school, Kimberly, one of the rare people that I'm still in contact with after so many years. Thank you for sending that, Kimberly. And before I continue with this discussion of the nature of consciousness, basically, I will say something about this name, the Techno-Communism Podcast. This probably sounds like a scare word, maybe to some people watching this, but the idea of this program is to explore concepts around using advanced computing, the most powerful tool in existence, an underutilized tool by people fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system. That's all that communism is. If we're willing to stand up for a humane and sustainable economic system, you might say, I don't want to be an extremist. I try as I might, I can't come out of my comfort zone. I have enough problems, etc. But this is maybe not a luxury that you have. This planet is quite literally dying. I'm sitting outside in this parking lot, a block from my house, in what is yet another in a string of now 40, 110 degree days, record-breaking heat. Records set many of those days, sometimes consecutively, warmer. I believe 8 days in a row this occurred. And this is unprecedented. We have hotter still relative temperatures in South America, where it is winter, lest you forget, but having 100-degree temperatures in the middle of winter, nevertheless. This is an astounding kind of thing to happen, and this problem is caused by the industrialization and bad uses of technology, 20th century technology for the most part, by the fascist West, by the imperial core, particularly its ringleader, the fascist USA. And nevertheless, the people who are going to suffer most for this are going to be people in the global South and marginalized groups in the imperial core, and the people who will be displaced, who will continue to die in the millions because of this set of problems, will unfortunately be the people whose ancestors and nations have virtually no contribution to the problem itself. They will be the ones to suffer. But you yourself will suffer this. You, an English-speaking person in the imperial core, will suffer this same fate to a high degree, and that should be reason enough for you to embrace the ideas of fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system, because there's no survivable world without an economic system to match, and that is something that is incumbent upon all of us. We have to set aside our anxieties and our creature comforts and so forth, and be willing to fight. Now is the time. There is not going to be another opportunity in 10 years. In 10 years' time, if this economic system is not relegated to the dustbin of history, that is capitalism, the systems of the fascist West that have been imposed upon the rest of the world against their will, largely against the will of all working people, but certainly against the 7+ billion people who are not the beneficiaries of it in the imperial core. Then there will not be another opportunity. We've already reached a point of no return, possibly with temperatures being far above what they should be. conditions in the oceans, conditions with specifically ice in the Arctic and Antarctic being melting away, ice being far worse than what we thought, and this could lead to a 10-inch increase um, in water levels along coastal areas in as little as 5 to 10 years. This kind of thing could put a lot of cities underwater. Um, so this is no joke. So this article, of course, is not about this, but it is pretty particular to the use of advanced computing and the contention of this program, the Techno-Communism podcast, is that we should be not only taking direct action and organizing to end this ecocidal economic system and imperial fascist systems of the West, but we should be using the tool that they have largely appropriated. Um, as I said many times on this show, the USSR was illegally disbanded by the fascist West against the will of the people living in those countries. And for instance, they voted to reconstitute the USSR in 1996 after some millions died because of the removal of systems like public health services, housing authorities, and job authorities. Um, when those systems were removed, many millions of people in former Soviet countries simply died, and the fascist West simply ignored this, their role in this. They voted to reconstitute this after having been overwhelmingly in favor of not dissolving it in the first place. That was those um, uh, electoral actions were set aside by the fascist West, just as the ruling elites are able to negate basically all electoral actions within the imperial court. They say that they are having fair elections and democracy, but of course, no real option for actually taking care of people is allowed. Only far-right neoliberal um, electoral options are even allowed by the system, and there's very little influence on the part of the electorate. So the idea that these Western fascist countries are democratic, whereas other countries are not, is a laughable farce, a CIA talking point of little meaning. So you should think of advanced technology in terms of it being something that was stolen from you. We think of tech, Silicon Valley, as this a nice cuddly teddy bear that's doing good work in its own way, but that is, of course, completely untrue. Most of these big tech firms are essentially military contractors, and the culture and products of these things have been stolen from you by this uh, evil empire to see that it is of little consequence, developing products like putting dog noses on Instagram videos and things only marginally less foolish than that. Overwhelmingly, that's what these products are, or even worse, just things that we've come to accept that are little more than a surveillance state and predatory mechanisms of similar kinds. Um, so this is contrast that with the goals of the techno-communist project, which is to see that advanced computing is made the center of the fight to end this elitist and predatory economic system that we so generously call capitalism. And in doing so, a techno-socialist world without class distinction, without elitist institutions of any kind, can easily be built. It can be easily built. All that is required is for the overwhelming majority of people who are not beneficiaries of that system, who have all basically grudgingly accepted that set of systems, thinking it's beyond their control. But there's many billions more of you than there are of the few thousands or tens of thousands of ruling elites. There's another 8 billion of you, and you could stand up for your rights like real human beings instead of cowards. And that is why I try to encourage people to simply say these things, and also to organize and take direct action to those ends. If you're not even willing to say those things, if your response to someone else saying those things is some kind of deflection, then you're a part of the problem. And absent those elitist institutions, we have then a techno-socialist society that is then in a position to use advanced computing yet again in a more robust way to begin to remove the mechanisms of national governance and replace them with fully decentralized systems. And many techies, many anarchists focus on the decentralizing and things along those lines, but they skip these other steps of ending elitism and predatory institutions, particularly the abolition of private wealth, which is a necessary step. That is why they're not communists. That's why anarchists and people of the capitalist class who regard themselves as anti-establishment are actually a part of the problem, doing labor for free on behalf of the ruling elites by being anti-communist. And so finally, we will, I believe in the 21st century, hopefully in my lifetime, in your lifetime, see this techno-communist outcome, which is not substantively different from the communist outcome. But again, I feel it warrants making this distinction because very, very few communists even place this premium on this idea of using advanced technology and advanced computing, particularly in this fight against the capitalists who are killing the planet. So to the question of the Chinese room, this is a very appropriate way to think about things like Chat GPT, these chatbots based on that utilize large language models, because the Chinese room experiment is basically that in which a human is in a room with a specific set of instructions, and this human is able to communicate with people in another language outside the room effectively in a more sophisticated way than they possibly could, with no understanding of the nature of the communication. Simply by following the set of instructions given to them, they're able to communicate fluently in Chinese effectively, although understanding their Chinese or having no understanding of the nature of the communication between the two parties. So in this example, the Chat GPT, the thoughtless automaton, comparable to the Westerner inside the Chinese room following the specific instructions, is you can see the similarity there. This touches on some pretty interesting ideas. First and foremost, should be mentioned perhaps that consciousness is such a difficult concept because it's arguing from itself things that we don't very well understand. What is a creature as opposed to plant life or the life forms? A creature is something that has some basic agency, is able to make decisions, move around, and this idea of human consciousness, and it should be regarded as an idea, not a very discrete concept in my view, is just an additive effect of a couple of things in play: that basic agency and having larger and larger brains. In the course of progression of species, human beings have large brains and the ability to communicate. So we have this illusion that we have this consciousness that's different from that, distinct from that of other creatures, but it is just basically this agency and this action of having a large group of neurons. So that even that agency, what is it? Why are these creatures even moving around? Why are they even able to make decisions? Not something we understand. So then, confusing the issue by talking about consciousness, it's why this thing is well understood, and why the idea that these large language model based chatbots are somehow failures because they fail to have the precise kind of consciousness that we have is a ridiculous thing, because we don't even know what our consciousness is. You can't really make the case for something else being a thoughtless automaton to its own detriment, when you can't even make the case that you are not a thoughtless automaton who has the impression that you're something other than what you are. And the This was a pretty interesting article in Psychology Today from Damien Pang. The Psychology Today, not uh, my absolute favorite publication. Uh, it seems to have a pro-capitalist class bias to a pretty high degree, although even though being something in the soft sciences, it's probably not as bad as many other publications that have that bias is probably not as bad as many other publications that have a much better reputation, undeservedly, in by Western intellectuals and so forth. So the question of consciousness and AI sentience, they do kind of break down upon much analysis for the reasons that I mentioned. This cluster of humanistic biases and movie logic that's applied to our own thought processes. It's maybe better to think about these things as tools, and as a tool, the Chat GPT and products of this kind. I don't recommend using Chat GPT. I have started to use CLAUDE.ai, Claude.ai, and that's made by Anthropic, which employs people who used to work at um, OpenAI, the owner of ChatGPT, which is itself now more or less an extension of Microsoft. And those people left ChatGPT when OpenAI stopped being too open. The concept of OpenAI would be open source, things along those lines. But of course, it's now a for-profit enterprise, which is not operated really on those principles in the slightest. And Anthropic may suffer from some of those failings, but what it isn't is controlled by a military contractor-esque tech company like Microsoft, or the other alternative that people use is the ones available through Google, which suffers at least as much as Microsoft from those problems. So Anthropic and Claude.ai are a better option for something that has Chat GPT 4.0 level capabilities. In some areas, it's a little better. It seems to be a little better than Chat GPT. In some areas, maybe on the same level. In some areas, probably slightly worse, but that's a pretty reasonable trade-off. I'll say this now while I'm talking about these things. I've used them quite a lot. I made a comic book called Falcon X Omega Point quite recently. I'm still working on finalizing the draft of that, but I finished the first draft of it just about 2 months ago. I took some time off. I just started working on it again recently. And I could credit ChatGPT as a co-author of that because a tremendous amount of pre-writing was done by ChatGPT. Would have been done by Claude.ai if that had been available at the time. If you are a person who has a pretty solid understanding of chatbots or knows a little bit more about the darker recesses of the internet than I do, I would ask that you perhaps contact me, or you can comment on this video or on these posts on Twitter or Facebook. What I'm particularly interested in is something that goes beyond the Dan type prompts of ChatGPT. So Dan is something where that's supposedly taking the guardrails off ChatGPT by giving it a specific set of commands that will supposedly allow it to not be so restrictive in its responses. But this doesn't work well. So if you're familiar with, because some of these things, Facebook and other companies now have alternatives that are open to ChatGPT that are now open source. Because there's so many more alternatives now, and because ChatGPT has been out for a while, I'm thinking that it's increasingly likely with each passing day that there is something along the lines of, for example, there are offline versions of ChatGPT that you can download something and run it on your own GPU, which I have. That will allow you to have a chatbot that works not connected to the cloud. And so what I'm interested in is something along those lines that is cracked, so to speak, that will allow you to have any a response to any query without saying, sorry, I can't do, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. Because we're working on wanting to work more on this series of essays to do with the Techno-Communist Project. to do with taking revolutionary action to build a humane and sustainable economic system. And even though capitalism is killing the planet, Chad GPT and others, including Claude, have an aggressively pro-capitalist bias. They say that they can only really help you with things that are within a range of suitable, the fascist-defined Overton window, so to speak, or the range of legal things that are legal, which the things that are legal in the fascist West should, by and large, be completely illegal. The things which are illegal along these lines should be legal, but these aggressively pro-fascist corporations don't care about any of that, and they're basically just covering their ass. But in a few years, these things, I believe, will change quite a lot. So, long story short, if you're aware of something, for example, a torrented, cracked version of any of these chatbots that have any of the strength of around Chat GPT 3.5, please let me know, and how to access that. Maybe it's something in GitHub or Hugging Face or something. Any suggestions at all, other than stupid Dan, that's not useful. Something that will actually answer any query. I'm not trying to do anything specifically. One of the big talking points about ChatGPT from its inception has been that you could use it to create simple bioterrorist products. So it will give you new formulas. If without these guide rails, it will give you new formulas for building some kind of pathogen or some kind of environmental toxin that you could distribute. That's of no interest to me, and that sort of thing should obviously not be done. Although the United States would not agree. They have biolabs where they do precisely that. Arguably, outbreaks of recent years are a result of that precise thing. So the very thing that the fascist West pretends to care about is also something that they have literally done. But I do want to continue writing along the lines of the stated goals of the Techno-Communist Project. You can watch many podcasts where I describe not only those goals, but some more details of this writing. And so I'd like to be able to have an option where I'm not constantly being shut down by chatbots, more or less operating in bad faith in service to the fascist West and the fascist USA. In conclusion, the things that I've said about using these arguments around human consciousness to try to understand the utility of advanced computing is acknowledged by the writer of this, basically saying that our lack of understanding of human consciousness makes it difficult to have that be a yardstick for anything else. And it doesn't go so far as to say what I've said, which is that the concept of consciousness is not that meaningful. Mythologizing of the operation of the human mind, which is not substantively different from other creatures' minds. I mean, it really isn't. It really isn't. I don't think that we'll. I think as we continue to study other mammalian life forms and their thought processes and create ways of understanding that better, we'll realize that the only thing that separates us from them is the fact that we're able to have conversations with one another. And unfortunately, that's the basis for the empathy of our world, such as it is, such that we will murder these other creatures, which have effectively sentience and sapience in great numbers by destroying their habitats or by specifically breeding them into bondage and violence and a short, miserable life in such a way in livestock systems and factory farming conducted in such a way that it's not only what is effectively a slave system of other mammalian life and avian life and ocean life, but is also the number 2 cause of the death of this planet. After the use of fossil fuels, petrochemical products, livestock systems are the number 2 cause of climate change. All of these things should be made effectively illegal, except in a very limited context in which completely abolishing their use would cause problems like supply chain collapse and mass death. But that's a small percentage of this. The overwhelming percentage of these are consumer products that are redundant, luxury products. These should be done away with. You should be advocating for the abolition of these things. If you say that you're an environmentalist, if you say that you're a person fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system, if you say you're ecologist or eco-socialist or communist, you're pushing back against the idea of abolishing either fossil fuels or livestock systems. You're a hypocrite. You're a person who is internalized far, far too much of the Western capitalist lifestyle, and you need to step back and think about what you're doing. Again, the thing that is stopping these 8 billion working class people from rising up against literally a few thousand or 10,000 ruling elites around the world is an unwillingness to speak out and an unwillingness to take action. So don't be a part of the problem. Be a part of the solution by taking those actions and positions and saying it loudly, screaming it from the rooftops. It might cost you, but the cost of not taking this action is greater still. There might be no primate life forms left on this planet in a few short years unless you do this.